If you learned that one of your commissioners was running state business on a private server in his or her house using a private email account to which you have no access, what would you think?
I would think that something's wrong unless they were doing what every other Secretary of the State had done before.
But she was told by the White House not to do this.
Listen, there are different standards that get applied. And Hillary Clinton has lived a life where different standards have been applied to her routinely. So let's be very clear. All of her predecessors did their business exactly the same way. And you don't have anywhere near the access to the emails of any one of those Secretary of States that you now have access to her.
But she hasn't released all of them. She's only turned over what she says we should see.
Do you really need to see the conversations between she and her daughter?
Well, we don't know what else there is.
Actually, people have looked at it and have said that this is clean.
Who's looked at it?
All kinds of people. That's reported on a regular basis. Those emails with respect to Benghazi have been studied now by multiple committees, multiple individuals, and quite frankly, this Benghazi thing is a made-up issue by Republicans who want to take out the front runner on the Democratic side. That's what's going on. And the fact that we're even talking about this, not with respect to what every other Secretary of State did, but simply because we now need to have a Hillary standard that applies to her and not to any of the other counterparts, I think in and of itself is unfair. Having said that, she's done great work for us. She's done great work for Americans, and I'm proud to support her.
Do you think she has to answer more questions about Benghazi and the email?
She's already said she's going to testify. She already has testified. She's sworn and been sworn in, and not a single thing.
So why don't people trust her?
Because you keep repeating things like that. You don't report but you don't report that she has testified multiple times before the Congress of the United States, and there's not a single finding that she told anything but the truth.
The new poll out just today before this taping shows that 51% of Democrats say Benghazi is a serious issue.
It is because, quite frankly, if you turn on TV, and you listen to 23, 24, 26 Republican candidates say Benghazi is important, and if somebody asks you, okay, is it important, they're going to say yes. But in the context of what's happened, listen, under the Bush administration, our country was attacked, thousands of people died. Now, that's a great tragedy, and I would argue by at least the loss of lives, an even greater tragedy than the terrible loss of lives in Benghazi. We have spent more money inspecting the records and having hearings on Benghazi than we did on 9/11.
What about all these reports in the Washington Post and New York Times? These are not Republican publications that are doing these investigations into the Clintons.
What about them?
Well, in terms of her trustworthiness, it's not necessarily just coming from Republicans, is it? It's also coming from them.
No, they're reporting what other folks are saying, and then when you go back to the reality, she has stood up for children, she's stood up for the elderly, she did a great job as Secretary of State, she's responsible for some of the most positive changes in our country with respect to the health of children. These are pretty important things, but I think that if I was a Republican, I wouldn't want to talk about the Bush administration. I wouldn't want to talk about the 2 wars that they started and didn't pay for. I wouldn't want to talk about how much they drove the deficit. In fact, let's be very clear, a Democratic president has half the deficit that our country has halved it as compared to his predecessor who drove the deficit and potentially the country into a ditch.
If you were asked about Hillary Clinton's role in getting us into the Iraq war, what would you say?
I would say that I bet you she'd like to have that vote back. And I think there are a lot of folks who would like to have that vote back. Having said that, it was based on information being supplied by the Bush administration, which turned out to be incorrect. There were not massive weapons, or there weren't weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, as all of us as Americans, as everyone in the Congress and everyone in the Senate had been told there were. That's the reality. I think hindsight is always 20/20. And by the way, I think a good leader learns from those experiences, and I think she has.